Welcome to Spindle and Spoon Homestead, your place for simple living and hand spinning. Today I'm going to share with you how this cap is made from sheep. This is me with my friend Anne. She is the owner, the shepherdess at Leaf Livestock Wool Company. She raises many kinds of sheep and has their wool spun into beautiful yarns that she dyes and weaves with. She also sells weaving patterns. She raises Merino, Columbia, and a couple other breeds of sheep in northern Illinois. Here's a video of her warping her rigid heddle loom. It's a small portable kind of loom. And here's a larger rigid heddle loom. I just wanted to share some of her videos so you can see not only is she doing all the work of raising sheep along with her husband and her son, but she's also doing all the work of a fiber artist, a designer, a dyer, running a fiber business where she sells yarn, and designing weaving patterns. And she's also weaving cloth regularly. She will take her loom out to auctions, sheep shows, her son's marching band performances and competitions, road trips, all those kinds of things. You can take the smaller loom in the car and just weave wherever you are. And Anne and I have known each other for a couple years, and I even had the opportunity to visit her at her farm in Illinois because my parents live somewhat near there. And it was such a wonderful visit. It's just so great when you meet online friends in person. Her farm was beautiful. It was really large to me, but she was like, actually compared to the rest of the Midwest, this is a very small farm. And it was surrounded by cornfields. They also have a Christmas tree farm. And Anne has, I think it's 5 sons. So she's raised most of them to adulthood, but she's got one left at home. She and her husband are just amazing people, and I really enjoyed visiting them in person. Here's Anne weaving with her smaller loom in the car on a road trip. Weaving is pretty time consuming, as I'm sure you can imagine. I'm not sure, but I think it might be slightly faster than knitting, but again, it kind of depends on the thickness of the yarn, what pattern you're using, all kinds of variables, so who knows. But there's no denying that weaving, like knitting and all the other fiber arts, is very hands-on and very human. So Anne wove several pieces of cloth and sent them to me and asked me to sew them into some hats that she could sell at different markets and things. So I found a free pattern for this style of cap. I've heard it called a flat cap or a newsboy cap. I'm not sure what it's really called. It has several names, but it's this really cute kind of cap that is often made in wool tweed fabrics. So I thought it'd be perfect made with some of Anne's hand-woven, homegrown, hand-dyed wool fabric. And so I'm going to share some tips and tricks about sewing with hand-woven fabric. The main concern with sewing with hand-woven fabric is that it can very easily unravel or stretch out and distort. So you have to use a very light touch with it, especially once it's cut out. You don't want to stretch any curves or be rough on any of the edges, making them unravel or stretch out. Also with hand-woven fabric, you've got to be very careful when you're cutting out, because this is precious fabric, right? You want to cut it out to save in the most space efficient way possible. So you could see I laid out the pattern pieces multiple times in multiple different ways before I settled on my final decision. So this cap has 2 brim pieces, 1 top piece that's that funny looking shape I just made, and then 1 side piece that wraps around the side, the back of the head. And then you also cut all of the same pieces out except for the brim out of a lining fabric. So I chose this yellow calico quilting cotton for the lining. Both of these pieces are supposed to be cut on the fold, but I didn't quite have enough fabric, so I'm going to cut them out with a bit of seam allowance where the fold should be, and then stitch them together. Which you can also do with hand woven fabric if you think that would look okay in the end and you want to save fabric, because it often does conserve, space on your laid out fabric. The first step is to sew up the back, or it's the top piece, but you sew up this dart along the back that fits around the back of your head. It's pretty easy. You just sew right down the sort of V-shaped opening that's a dart. And then I pressed it open. Wool is always a delight to press. It responds really well to heat and steam. Okay, now this side piece is very curvy and it's going around another curvy piece, and so it can be pretty tricky to get it all to fit in properly. There are notches on the pattern pieces. I recommend not clipping the notches to mark them, but use chalk or pins, that's what I chose as pins, to mark them on your fabric pieces. If you clip the notches, that's just another chance for the fabric to unravel or stretch out. So now I'm pinning this concave curved piece to a convex curved piece, and it looks like there's no possible way that it's going to fit, but it does. You just have to be patient, match up your notches, match up the ends, and match up the center front of the cap. And then once you've got all of those pinned, then you can start pinning all of the gaps in between your pins. And really it's just fiddling with the fabric, coaxing it into place, and as soon as you've got it in place, pin it before you lose the place. And in the end, you've got it's starting to look kind of like a dish, like a bowl, if you have it upside down like this, or like a slipper kind of. It's got a flat bottom and then this thing going around it, standing up around it. Then you just sew all the way around. And while you're sewing curves with hand woven fabric, be really careful not to stretch it out as you sew. You don't want to stretch anything. Just move the fabric around the curve. Don't stretch it around the curve, if that makes sense. That might make more sense if you're sewing it in the moment. Another option, if you're worried, is to serge around all of your pieces before sewing, and that can help keep those edges from unraveling. I chose to serge my seams after I sewed them for the same reason. If you don't have a serger, you can also use a zigzag stitch on your machine and that'll work fine. Then you also have to put together your lining the same exact way, making the dart. And I also had to sew the folds that I didn't have, sew together those seams. Now I've got my top piece and my side piece. And I can stitch them together. Once again, lining up the corners, the center front, and the notches. Then, after you've got those pinned in place, start fiddling with and coaxing the rest of the seams to fit together properly without any bunching or tucks, like little bits of folded fabric. You don't want any of that. You want it all to be flat. And it does take quite a bit of coaxing sometimes. You can see how much my fingers are moving as I try to get these fabrics to work together and fit together. This is all at 5x speed, so I just want to emphasize, even though I'm sewing by machine, it's still very hands-on. There's still a lot of humanity in anything that is hand sewn, whether it's by hand or by machine. It's still a lot of hands involved and a lot of time and skill. And I only have like the barest minimum of skill in this. I'm not as fast as professionals who are making these hats in like sewing factories. I can make it, but it's gonna take me extra time. As I'm sewing along here, I'm just being really careful, making sure there's no tucks or little folded bits that are gonna go under the needle. I don't want anything to be puckered when it's done. I want it all to be flat. And then don't forget to press all of your seams. It's really a big difference. It can make a really big difference between something looking badly homemade and something looking professional. Even if you're not pressing them open, just pressing them, sometimes that's the better option, is just press the seams. It gives it more crispness. I learned that in college and it is totally true. Press all those seams. Alright, next is the brim. I got this stiff interfacing that I'll link below. It feels kind of like really stiff felt. It is sewable, so you're just going to layer interfacing, one wool layer and then a second wool layer. So you've got two pieces for your yellow fabric and then one piece for the interfacing. You're going to sew around the front of the brim. And I chose to serge it as well because this is it's pulled right side out really tightly, and I was worried. I just want to reinforce it as much as I can. Then you fold it right side out and stitch about a 1/4 inch from the edge for some top stitching. And as I go, I am pushing that top layer of yellow fabric to the left because it really wants to curl under the brim. I need to force it over. And that's your brim. Now, putting it all together. Put your lining inside the hat. The hat is right side out. The lining is wrong side out. So you're putting wrong sides together. Pin it at all the seams and all the way around. and sew it all the way around. You can just use a basting stitch right here. That's a basting stitch is just a long stitch meant to be either temporary or just holding something together temporarily before you do a shorter stitch that's more durable. It's kind of like pinning together. It's just holding it together temporarily. Then you want to pin on your brim. Make sure it's nice and centered. Working with this stiff interfacing is a bit challenging. You're going to sew that brim on and just take your time getting it sewn on. It is very thick and it's kind of hard to maneuver, but it does bend. It's very flexible, so just work with it and be patient. Okay, it's almost finished. The last step is adding your grosgrain ribbon. This is grosgrain ribbon. It has little ridges on it. It's spelled grosgrain, but it's pronounced grosgrain. You can buy it at any kind of craft store or fabric store. This is the classic hat ribbon band. I think because it curves nicely, but I'm not sure why it is so prevalent in caps. So you need to pin it on, and you're also folding under your hat edge. You're folding it to the inside of the hat and also pinning the ribbon on. I chose to cut out the excess interfacing here to get rid of some of that bulk and make it a little easier to stitch the ribbon on. I also chose to serge around the edge to make it a little easier to fold under and keep everything tidy. Again, you could just use a zigzag stitch. Now, finally ready to add that grosgrain. See how I am folding the edge of the cap to the inside and then pinning on the ribbon. And when I get to the brim, I have to switch to only pinning the brim and the ribbon, not the top of the cap, because obviously you don't want a giant stitch seam going down the middle of your hat so you can't even put it on. So I'm only pinning the cap, or the brim, to the ribbon across here, and then when I get to the end of the brim, I'm once again folding under the edge of the cap, pinning it to the ribbon, and the edges of the ribbon I just fold them under, and it's ready to sew. It is a bit challenging going around at this point, especially the transition from the cap, the side of the cap, to the brim. It's a very weird transition. Just make sure that you're getting the brim and the ribbon stitched together, but not stitching any other part of the cap to that as well. See how I'm like squishing it and maneuvering it so I can sew exactly what I want to sew and nothing else, and not have any mistakes that I have to redo. If you had a different, like an industrial machine that has like an arm, you could just wrap it around it and you could go really fast. That would be cool. Okay, now it is done. All that's left is just to press down this ribbon so it sits a little more nicely. Now you can press your grosgrain ribbon to the inside of the cap. Use lots of steam and it should get pressed in pretty well. And it'll kind of get a better shape as well after you wear it a lot. Now it is, you can either wear it like that, or you can, in most cases, the brim is stitched down in just a couple places. The brim and the top of the cap are stitched together, but this part is optional. So I just took a needle and thread and just tacked it down with just a few stitches in a few spots. I've seen some hats that have snaps, and I've seen some hats that are stitched all the way across the front of the brim. So there's different options. And here's our finished cap. I'm just going to give it one more little bit of steam to make it look really nice. And I've never actually made one of these before, and it was pretty fun. I made 2 of them for her, and I also have some of my own hand-woven fabric that I'm excited to use to make one for either my husband or for me, or we could share it, I guess, or maybe I'll sell it. I haven't decided. But I just wanted to share some of my tips for sewing with hand-woven fabrics. I know that can be kind of scary, but it really doesn't have to be. And the more that you do it, the better you will get at it. And just remember that fiber art, even though it is very precious and it takes a lot of time to create, it also is very renewable. The sheep are always growing more wool. There will always be more yarn. You can always make more. It's not a finite resource. So don't be afraid to try something new, learn a new skill, and make some mistakes. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and give Anne some love as well.